One of the most difficult realities people face, often without fully realizing it, is what it means to be entangled with a narcissist. These are individuals who thrive on chaos, on drawing you into their orbit of manipulation, where your attention, your very emotional energy, becomes their fuel. And here's the hard truth. When you speak, when you defend, when you argue, you give them precisely what they want. They want the game, the backhand, forth, the drama, because it validates their sense of control. But silence is not weakness. Silence is an act of refusal. It is the withdrawal of energy from a destructive system. It's saying, I will not play your game anymore. And that's extraordinarily powerful because it flips the dynamic on its head. You are no longer reacting to them. You are reclaiming yourself. Silence, properly chosen, is not passive. It's active resistance, and more than that, it's freedom. Because once you stop feeding the narcissist, they lose their hold on you, and you begin to see who you truly are without their distortion shaping your reality. When you find yourself in the grip of a narcissist, the first thing you have to understand is that they survive by extracting energy from you, not physical energy, but emotional energy. They provoke, they twist, they bait you into reacting, because your reaction is their sustenance. The more you speak, the more you defend, the more you justify your existence in the face of their accusations or manipulations, the more power they feel they have over you. This is why so many people caught in such relationships feel constantly drained. It isn't because they're weak, it's because the narcissist is strategically pulling from them, moment after moment, through endless demands for attention. Now, imagine removing that supply. Silence does precisely that. It denies them what they crave most: your attention, your energy, your emotional involvement. It's not just about not speaking. It's about refusing to feed the dynamic that keeps you trapped. Think of it like this. If someone is starving for control and you stop handing them the meal, they begin to lose their grip. They can scream, they can provoke, they can try to escalate, but the moment you refuse to respond, their power begins to collapse. Silence becomes a boundary without the need for confrontation. Confrontation with a narcissist is nearly always futile because they thrive in the argument. They are not looking for truth, they are not interested in clarity, and they are certainly not invested in mutual understanding. Their goal is to win, to dominate, to twist words until you question your own reality. By staying silent, you strip away the very arena in which they perform their game. You walk out of the ring. You deny them the victory of your emotional investment. But make no mistake, silence is not easy. In fact, it might be one of the most difficult acts of discipline you ever choose. Human beings are wired to defend themselves when attacked, to explain themselves when misunderstood, and to seek validation when falsely accused. The narcissist knows this instinct well and exploits it ruthlessly. Choosing silence requires you to override that instinct, to remind yourself that you do not need to explain who you are to someone committed to misunderstanding you. That is where your strength begins to grow. And there's another layer to this. Silence is not only a tool against the narcissist, it is a tool for you. When you stop speaking into their chaos, you create space for your own thoughts to settle. You begin to see the pattern more clearly. You begin to recognize the manipulation for what it is, instead of being dragged into its current. The energy you once poured into defending yourself now returns to you, and in that return, you rediscover your autonomy. Silence is not just a refusal of them, it is a restoration of you. So, when we say silence removes their fuel, we're talking about more than cutting off a supply line. We're talking about dismantling an entire system of control, one that only functions if you play your role. The moment you step back and choose silence, the dynamic shifts. They lose what they need most, and you regain what you had forgotten, your power to choose freedom. When people think about power, they often imagine it in terms of dominance, shouting louder, arguing harder, proving the other person wrong with facts, logic, or sheer force of will. But when it comes to dealing with a narcissist, that conception of power plays directly into their hands. They want you to fight. They want you to argue, because the moment you step into that arena, you've already given them what they crave, your attention and your emotional energy. You are playing their game, and in their game, they always win, because they are not bound by truth, fairness, or reason. They are bound only by the desire to control. That's why the refusal to engage is an act of power. It flips the script completely. When you refuse to engage, you are saying, "I will not fight on your battlefield. I will not let you dictate the terms of this interaction." This is not weakness. It is the very definition of strength, choosing not to squander your energy on someone who is incapable of using it for anything other than your destruction. Think about it like this. In every exchange, there is an implicit contract. If I speak, I open myself to response. If I argue, I accept that we are both bound in this dance of backhand. Fourth, the narcissist relies on you signing that contract every time. They thrive on the drama it creates. But when you withhold engagement, you are tearing up the contract. You are refusing to enter the dance, and that refusal is far more powerful than any counterargument you could ever construct. There is also something profoundly liberating about this choice. For so long, when caught in the web of a narcissist, you feel trapped, constantly pulled into defending, explaining, justifying. It's exhausting because it feels endless. But once you understand that you are not obligated to respond, that you can simply refuse, you suddenly realize you have far more control than you thought. Your silence, your non-engagement, is a declaration of independence. It says, "You don't get to dictate how I respond. I choose my own ground." Of course, the narcissist will push harder when they sense they are losing control. They may escalate their words, they may attempt to provoke you more aggressively, they may even try to guilt you or paint you as the problem. That is the test. This is where most people falter, because the urge to defend oneself against false accusations is nearly unbearable. But real power is found in holding your ground despite that urge. It is in recognizing that their words, however cutting, are not reflections of your worth, but weapons designed to hook your attention. When you refuse to engage, you blunt those weapons, and here's the deeper point. Refusal is not just about them. It's about you reclaiming the sovereignty of your inner world. Every time you resist the pull to argue, you reinforce the truth that your peace of mind is not up for negotiation. You are no longer a puppet on their string. You are someone who chooses where to place your energy, and that choice is power in its purest form. A narcissist cannot survive in silence. They require attention the way a flame requires oxygen. It doesn't matter whether that attention comes in the form of praise, admiration, or even anger and resistance. Any response, positive or negative, feeds them. That's why their behavior so often seems contradictory. One moment they flatter you, the next they cut you down. One moment they act as though you're the most important person in their world. The next they belittle you until you doubt your very worth. The consistency isn't in their words or actions. It's in their need for your attention. That is the lifeblood of their identity. This is why it's so difficult to disentangle from them. Our instinct as human beings is to respond. We want to answer when spoken to. We want to defend ourselves when attacked. And we want to resolve conflict when it arises. The narcissist exploits this instinct masterfully. They push your buttons until you can't resist firing back, and in that moment, they get exactly what they want. Proof that they still control your focus. Proof that they still dominate your inner world. Even your outrage becomes their reward. The tragedy is that many people believe they can fix the dynamic by explaining themselves better, by appealing to fairness, or by pointing out the narcissist's hypocrisy. But here's the brutal truth. They don't care about fairness, they don't care about truth, and they certainly don't care about your feelings. They care about one thing, being the center of your emotional universe. As long as you're responding, as long as they occupy your thoughts, they have what they need. Attention is the oxygen that keeps their disorder alive. Understanding this changes everything. Once you see that attention is the currency they trade in, you realize that every time you react, you're paying them. You're funding the very system that oppresses you. The only way to cut off that system is to stop making payments, to stop giving them what they crave. And this doesn't just mean refusing to argue. It means withdrawing your emotional investment altogether. They want to be the first thing you think about when you wake up, and the last thing before you sleep. The real act of resistance is when they no longer occupy that space. It's important to remember, too, that attention doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Even quiet worry, replaying conversations in your mind, Anticipating their next move still fuels them, because your energy is still tied to them, even if they're not in the room. So, the discipline here is not only external silence, but internal redirection. You take the focus that was once theirs, and you give it back to yourself, your healing, your growth, your future. The moment you starve them of attention, you begin to suffocate their hold. They may thrash, they may fight harder, because they feel that oxygen supply dwindling. But if you remain steadfast, you discover something remarkable. Without your attention, they shrink. They lose the grandiosity they once projected, and in that space, you begin to expand. That's when freedom becomes possible, when your attention is no longer their oxygen, but your own fuel for reclaiming your life. When you choose silence in the face of a narcissist, something subtle but profound begins to happen. You create psychological distance. And that distance is not just between you and them externally, but within your own mind. Narcissists thrive on collapsing the boundary between themselves and others. They insert themselves into your thoughts, your decisions, your emotions, until you no longer know where you end and they begin. That is the essence of their control. They blur the lines so thoroughly that your sense of self becomes entangled with their demands and manipulations. Silence is the first step to redrawing those lines. When you stop responding, you stop reinforcing the false reality they are trying to impose on you. Every word you speak in reaction to their games keeps you tethered to their world. But when you step back and refuse to engage, you create breathing room, a space where your thoughts are no longer constantly interrupted by their influence. That space is psychological distance, and it is where healing begins. Think of it like being caught in a storm. If you stand in the middle of it, you can't see clearly, you can't think, you can't plan. All you can do is react to the chaos around you. But if you step out from the storm's center, even a few feet, you begin to gain perspective. You can watch the storm rather than be consumed by it. Silence is that stepping out. It doesn't immediately end the storm, but it changes your relationship to it. Instead of being inside the chaos, you are observing it from a distance. This psychological distance matters because clarity cannot exist without it. Narcissists are masters of confusion, gaslighting you, denying reality, twisting words until you second-guess your own memory. But their manipulations require your active participation. They need you to argue back so they can shift the ground beneath you. When you remain silent, you deny them that platform. In the absence of constant verbal battle, your mind begins to clear. You can start to recognize the patterns for what they are instead of being lost in them. It's also in this distance that you rediscover your autonomy. Silence is not just about withholding words, it's about reclaiming your mental landscape. Every time you choose not to react, you are reminding yourself that you don't have to live inside the narcissist's narrative. You begin to see yourself as separate, as someone whose identity and worth are not dependent on their approval or recognition. This psychological separation is what ultimately leads to emotional freedom. Of course, the narcissist will resist this distance. They may push harder, escalate their tactics, or attempt to lure you back in with either charm or cruelty. But if you hold firm, the space widens. Over time, the emotional fog lifts and the grip they once had begins to weaken. You start to breathe more freely, you start to think your own thoughts again, and in that distance you realize something vital. The power they held was never absolute. It only existed as long as you allowed them inside your psychological space. Silence is how you close that door, and in doing so, you reclaim the sanctuary of your own mind. Freedom does not begin when the narcissist changes. It does not begin when they finally admit their wrongs or suddenly decide to treat you with fairness. That day will almost never come. Freedom begins the moment you decide not to react. This may seem small, almost insignificant, but in truth, it is the single most powerful shift you can make. Reaction is the thread that keeps you tied to their control. Every insult, every manipulation, every provocation is designed to pull a reaction out of you. The narcissist does not need you to agree with them. They only need you to respond. Because as long as you are reacting, you are still in the game, still under their influence, still caught in the cycle. When you stop reacting, you break that cycle. At first, it feels unnatural, even impossible. You are wired to defend yourself, to set the record straight, to prove that you are not who they accuse you of being. But every time you engage in that defense, you are feeding the very system that enslaves you. Choosing not to react is a refusal to participate in their theater. You are saying, "I see what you're doing, and I will no longer play my part in it." That moment of refusal is the spark of freedom. The interesting thing about reaction is that it doesn't just bind you externally, it binds you internally. Even when you argue back, even when you win at the point, you often walk away feeling drained, confused, and diminished. That's because the true battle is not about truth or reason. It's about control. By reacting, you've still given them what they wanted: your energy, your attention, your emotional vulnerability. It doesn't matter if you think you scored a victory. If you reacted, they've succeeded. Freedom begins when you choose stillness over reaction. That stillness gives you back your center. It shifts the focus from them to you. Instead of being pulled into their whirlwind, you anchor yourself in calm. You may feel their words wash over you, but you don't have to chase them, defend against them, or let them dictate your state of mind. In that non-reaction, you begin to see clearly that their chaos is theirs, not yours. And that realization is liberating. It's worth noting that non-reaction is not passivity. It is not weakness. It is an act of immense strength. To sit in silence while every instinct inside you screams to answer back takes discipline, courage, and resolve. But that discipline is precisely what frees you, because every time you resist the urge to react, you weaken the narcissist's hold over you. You reclaim your emotional independence, and with it, the possibility of a life no longer governed by their manipulation. So, freedom is not found in changing them, nor in proving them wrong, nor in convincing them to see your truth. Freedom begins, and often ends, with your refusal to react. It is the quiet strength of saying nothing, the steady choice to withhold your energy, and the recognition that your peace of mind is more valuable than any argument could ever be. That is the moment the chains begin to fall away. When you choose silence in the face of a narcissist, you are doing something far more profound than simply withholding words. You are reclaiming yourself, sovereignty. For too long, the narcissist has been dictating the rhythm of your emotions, pulling you into battles you never wanted to fight, convincing you that your worth depends on their approval or disapproval. They become the measure against which you evaluate yourself, and slowly, almost without noticing, you hand over control of your inner world. Silence is how you take it back. Self-sovereignty means that you are the authority of your own mind, your own emotions, your own choices. It is the recognition that no one has the right to control the way you see yourself or the way you live your life. But with a narcissist, this sovereignty is continually undermined. Every insult chips away at your confidence. Every manipulation bends your sense of reality. Every argument forces you to defend who you are. Over time, you begin to forget that you have the right to simply exist as yourself, without justification. Silence restores that right. When you stop responding, you are no longer allowing them to define the terms of engagement. You are saying, "You do not get to decide how I use my energy. You do not get to occupy my mind without my permission." That is sovereignty in action, choosing where your attention goes, and more importantly, where it doesn't. You redirect the energy that once fueled their control back into yourself. That energy becomes the foundation for rebuilding your confidence, your clarity, and your independence. And here's the deeper truth: self-sovereignty is not just about keeping the narcissist out, it's about inviting yourself back in. Many people entangled with narcissists lose touch with who they really are. They become so focused on survival, on managing the other person's moods, that they stop listening to their own needs and desires. Silence creates the space to hear yourself again. In the quiet, you begin to notice your own thoughts, your own values, your own dreams. Uninterrupted by the constant noise of manipulation, you realize that you are more than what the narcissist has reduced you to. Of course, the narcissist will not like this. They will sense that you are reclaiming ground they once controlled. They may accuse you of being cold, selfish, or uncooperative. They may try to guilt you into re-entering their world. But their reaction is proof of your progress. Every attempt they make to break your silence is confirmation that your self-sovereignty threatens them, because it means they are losing their grip. The key is to hold steady. Each time you resist the pull, you strengthen the walls of your inner independence. In the end, silence is not about punishing the narcissist, it's about liberating yourself. It is a declaration that your life belongs to you again. That your worth is not up for debate, that your peace is not negotiable, and when you consistently choose silence, you discover something extraordinary. The narcissist no longer has the power to define you. You have reclaimed your sovereignty, and with it, the freedom to live as the author of your own story.